bringing together our community to learn from one another as we continue to build a strong Jewish Atlanta for generations to come. We welcome your questions. If you have any, please enter them in the chat box. We may not get to all of them, but we will try our best to get to as many as possible. Special thanks to Ted Bloom and his partners at Greenberg Traurig Law Firm and also Regions Bank for sponsoring the 2021 Business and Professionals Breakfast Series. Before we begin, here is a brief video detailing just some of the great work Jewish Federation of Greater Atlanta does.
When the COVID-19 came out with the virus, it's been very hard for us. And being our age, we need to go stay inside our residence, and it affected our income.
The need for a strong community is especially important in challenging times. When this pandemic hit us, our synagogues closed their doors, everyone went to working remotely. We wondered whether our summer programs would happen. We canceled trips to Israel. People needed food, people needed shelter in some situations. We knew that we needed to have the funds necessary so that our organizations could respond to that.
The Jewish Federation and Jewish Family Services make sure we don't go hungry. They just look after us, which is wonderful.
The Jewish community has really come together to help people during COVID. Having organizations like the Federation means that we have this strong community to be able to fall back on when times are hard.
We said to our critical organizations in this community, you focus on what you do. Take care of our elderly, provide food security. And we said, we'll take care of the fundraising. We have an incredible network of people who are willing to do anything to help anyone in this family that we as a community can help. And all of these roots that we've planted here in Atlanta are going to grow, and we're going to have a better community than we've had.
It's been a struggle if we didn't have a Jewish community to help out. It helped a lot, and we really appreciate it.
The Jewish Federation has always been there, will be there now, and it's especially important in challenging times like this.
Wow, what an impactful video. If you haven't made your donation for the 2021 campaign, please click the link in the chat box to do so. As of today, we've raised 90% of our total philanthropy goal for the 2021 community campaign. Thank you so much for your support. At this time, I want to turn it over to our moderator, Greg Eisenman, to begin the panel discussion.
Thanks, Gary. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us for this installment of the Business Casual Breakfast Series. As Gary pointed out, we hope to be able to do this again in person in the near future, but until then, we're going to keep bringing you good, interesting conversations, and today is no exception. I'm very excited and honored to be able to moderate this discussion between experts in an industry that has been extremely impacted by COVID, but also one that is going to be vital to the recovery of our country for many, many reasons. So without further ado, I want to introduce you to our panelists for this morning. First of all, we have joining us Amy Conover. Amy is joining us from Windstar Cruises, where she's the Director of Charter and Incentive Sales. Windstar is a luxury small ship cruise line based in Seattle, which means that for Amy right now, it's shortly after 6 a.m. So Amy, we appreciate you joining us at this early hour to tell us a little bit about what's going on in your industry. We also have Chuck Imhoff from Delta Airlines. Chuck is the Vice President of New York and East Division Sales at Delta. He joined the company in 2009 and leads their New York sales team, and he brings over 30 years of experience in the travel industry. So again, a lot to offer from Chuck. Also joining us from Atlanta, we have Rob Levin with TPG Hotels and Resorts. Rob has been at TPG since 2002, and he currently serves as the Chief Investment Officer. The company is based in Atlanta, as noted, or has an office in Atlanta, and they have approximately $2 billion in diverse real estate assets, including hotels under many different flags and brands. And then finally, we have Chad Hume from Roark Capital. Chad is a principal there, and if you're not familiar, Roark Capital is a major private equity firm here based in Atlanta. With over $20 billion in assets under management, Chad joined Roark in 2009 and is focused on consumer and business service companies. And just as importantly, like me, he is a proud alumnus of the University of Georgia. Go Dogs. So if you want to know more about the panelists, check out the chat screen or the chat panel, and a link will be provided to more detailed bios. And I just want to ask that everybody remain on mute because we had the breakout sessions before. This isn't a webinar format, so we want to make sure that there's no side noise in the midst of the panel. Without further ado, we're going to move into the panel, and I just want to make one last point out, which is that if you have any questions, please just share them in the chat function again, and we'll try to get as many as we can answered by the end of the panel, but we're running a little bit behind on time. So if we can't get to them during the panel, we'll try and get you some answers after the fact. So I want to start with our first question, which is, what does hospitality mean to each of you? Obviously, the topic today is looking forward in hospitality, but there are many different ways that that term can be defined, especially right now. So tell us a little bit about what the definition of hospitality is to you and your company, and maybe how has that changed with the insertion of a mask or a plexiglass panel or 6 feet between the provider and the customer? So Chuck, why don't you take this one and get started? Thanks.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. Greg, thank you. Thank you for having us. It's hospitality. It's a great question. I don't think it's changed for us. Before the pandemic, we've always put people first, both our employees and a customer perspective. We try to be a values-led company where every decision that we make is really centered on the customer and on people, including our employees. When the pandemic first started, we unveiled an industry standard, or actually industry leading Delta Care standard. And under that was a whole list of protocols and processes and innovations that we put together centered around protecting both our employees and our customers. So I think our definition of hospitality will continue to be the same. It's shifted though with a lot more protocols. Used to be focused on the operations side of things. Now it also includes hygiene and cleanliness and things like that. And happy to share a lot of the protocols that we put in place, but maybe we'll be able to do that through the discussion later.
Thanks. And Amy, why don't you talk about how shifting over to the cruise industry, how that is differentiated from the airline industry? Obviously, you guys have some challenges right now as far as even being able to cast off. Amy, can you dive a little bit more into how you guys are taking a view on hospitality?
You might be on mute.
Thank you. Thank you. So thank you. Here at Windstar Cruises, the health and safety of everyone on board is top priority. And we're connected to the industry experts following guidelines and regulatory authorities in every area of the world. Our team has been implementing additional technologies to go beyond these requirements, and we have a new Beyond Ordinary Care Plan. And during the course of the COVID suspension of sailing while in the shipyards being renovated, Windstar took advantage of the time and made a multi-million-dollar investment to our fleet, providing healthy environment while sailing on a Windstar yacht. This includes a hospital grade high efficiency HEPA filters, as well as a UVC air zapping process, which has been installed on board all of our Windstar yachts. This is a double whammy for all of our protection. So it's been said that when you're sailing on a Windstar yacht, your biggest worry should be how not to avoid getting a sunburn versus not getting COVID-19. You'll still probably have to wear masks in some situations, and perhaps capacity limits in our shared spaces, along with self-serve buffets, resulting in more personal waiter service. But on Windstar, lines and crowded spaces have never been an issue. So in fact, our repeat clients really enjoy our vast outside deck space and watching the world go by in that regard. So
Outdoor space and a lot of room seem to be a good combination right now. So I
Exactly.
think you guys will be in good shape. Rob, tell us a little bit
Yes.
about what's going on in the hotel industry right now.
Well, I mean, I'm going to answer the question a little bit differently, maybe, because I could sit here and tell you, all about everything we've done, both at our obviously our corporate offices and then at our hotel properties with plexiglass and safety protocols and all the rest of it. And I think that's everybody has seen that, and it kind of is to some degree standard operating procedure. I mean, I think when I think of hospitality right now, I think of what we have to do, the best things that we have to do to help our company and our hotels, frankly, just survive. Because, our business has been so catastrophically impacted. We employ, 10, 15,000 people through, all of our hotel properties and our corporate, organization. And so to be honest, the first thing I think about, through this is all of those people and what do we need to do as a company? What have we needed to do as a company to try to, basically survive, maintain, our infrastructure, maintain our, as many of our employees as possible, in order to get through this and have a healthy business that can provide, opportunities for all of these folks, coming out of this. So, that's been, honestly, a big focus of, what we, as principals of the company spend our time on every day, just figuring out how to operate through this, how to maintain as many people as we can. We have actually have basically kept almost all of our hotels open through the entire pandemic, which is a little bit different than others. There have been many hotels that have chosen to close. We have chosen to keep our hotels open and try to maintain, again, as much of an operation and people as we can. I will give the government some props here because the initial PPP program that was rolled out immediately after, in March or April, whatever it was very, very helpful to inject capital into the business and be able to, help to continue to pay people and keep people on the payroll. And now this second round, which is happening now, will also be another shot in the arm. And, a lot of this is just trying to, as I said, trying to survive until, we can get to a place where, the business starts to normalize a little bit. And for us, that's kind of been our version of hospitality, over the last year or so.
I think we can take as much literal meaning out of a shot in the arm these days as maybe we ever could before.
Shots in the arms are going to be very, very important.
Yes, and still rare.
Talking about COVID-free flights and testing and all the rest of the stuff, my personal feeling has been for a while that, until there is a very, very large percentage of the population that's vaccinated, it's just going to be very, very difficult to get back to any sense of normal, activity. I mean, it'll come in dribs and drabs or whatever, but it isn't until then really that, that we'll start to really, see some normalization, in my opinion. So
So shifting over to Chad really quickly. Chad, you oversee different types of brands throughout your portfolio. Talk about how some of the different types of brands that you work with are adjusting again to that hospitality question. What does it mean to them, and what adjustments are they having to make, if any?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Greg. So I'd say hospitality to me means providing your customers with high quality service on their terms, in a way that ultimately drives strong satisfaction and loyalty. I spend a decent amount of my time in the restaurant space. And in that industry, traditionally, I think people have associated hospitality with in-store experiences. So think about the way that a server at a restaurant greets you, or how quickly they bring out your food. More recently, obviously, some of those priorities have shifted to making sure that we're providing, a safe customer experience. But these days, I think hospitality extends well beyond the four walls of the restaurant. The brands in our portfolio that are growing the fastest and are gaining the most market share are the ones that have been able to use digital channels to connect with customers and provide them with what they want, how they want it, when they want it, because ultimately it's about providing the customer with service on their terms. And in restaurants, more and more customers, are now ordering their food ahead of time and either picking it up or having it delivered to them on their terms. So the biggest investments that we've been making, and I think we'll continue to make across our portfolio, are really in technology, both in terms of consumer-facing technology like mobile apps and websites, to make sure that we're able to provide customers with a user-friendly and a seamless digital experience, as well as back-end technology to be able to service digital orders, like having the infrastructure, having the partnerships to make sure that when you want food delivered to your doorstep, that it gets there quickly and it gets there on time. So
I think that's a good segue into the next question, and I'm actually going to stick with you on this one, Chad, which is looking backwards a little bit, because I don't want to look back too far. I want to look forward. But can you talk a little bit about what the specific impact has been on different types of brands, whether it's casual dining, quick service, automotive? I know some brands would even say that the past year has been really good for them. Talk a little bit about what COVID has meant.
Yeah, it's a great question. And, in my time at work, I spend time in a few different industries. COVID has definitely impacted them in different ways. Our fitness concepts have probably been the most impacted by COVID in terms of, mandated shutdowns and capacity restrictions. I spend some of my time working on automotive service businesses that provide things like oil changes and auto repair and car washes. And those services were actually deemed essential and stayed open throughout all of last year. So they were a lot less impacted by COVID. And then, as I just mentioned, I spend a decent amount of my time working with our brands in the restaurant industry. Obviously, that's a space that's been pretty heavily impacted. I think there was a recent survey that suggested that over 100,000 restaurants across the country have actually closed permanently over the past year. But the reality of, I think, what we're seeing is, in the restaurant industry at least, is really a bifurcation between the companies that are struggling and the companies that are thriving. Many people are surprised when I tell them that we actually have restaurant brands in our portfolio that grew their sales by over 25% last year. And I think there are a few different factors that are contributing to that variation in performance. The first is probably their mix of off-premise sales. And by that, I mean, drive-through, takeout, delivery. As you can imagine, many of our quick service restaurant concepts are doing really well these days. The demand for food is the same as it was pre-COVID. People still need to eat. And a lot of the occasions that used to be going to sit-down restaurants are now going to fast food concepts that can offer convenience and a contactless experience. I think geography is another thing that's driving variation in performance. Overall, what we've seen is urban locations have been more impacted than rural locations. And a lot of the shutdown orders from state and local governments have been in the more densely populated markets. And I think a third factor that we're seeing that's driving variation in performance is really, it's more company specific, and it's around the ability to continue to invest in their businesses. Many companies have been struggling to stay afloat, and they pulled back on investments in areas like, marketing and product innovation. And the companies that I think entered 2020 with, liquidity and a strong balance sheet and still have capital to invest, it's really creating opportunities to attract new customers, many of which may not have considered the brand prior to COVID. So those are a few of the high level themes that I'm seeing.
Now, shifting over to operational impact, I want to go to Amy. Amy, talk a little bit. I think people probably draw some conclusions about what they think is going on in the travel industry, but maybe don't realize the extent to which that's happening. Talk a little bit about what the past almost year, I guess now about 10 months, has been for WinStar. You're on mute, by the way.
I'm being good about being on mute, that's for sure.
Thanks.
Yeah, this year, the entire cruise industry has entered uncharted territory. However, the news of the vaccine has led to a spike in new bookings in 2021, 22, and even into 23, because of my charter business is way booked out. But when we return back to seas with confidence and what the cruising is actually going to look like is still a fluid situation, because well, at WinStar, we're not going to sail until we feel it's completely 100% safe to do so. That being said, we're getting inquiries from more charters than ever because we have a small capacity and people like the fact that their corporate top producers can be on a small ship and control the environment on board. And the big news is in the cruise industry is that they're going to be enforcing mandatory testing prior to boarding until further notice, of course. And albeit the last 9+ months, the protocols from the CDC and the World Health Organization, as far as the cruise industry goes, has changed weekly. Every week it's a new, challenge. So WinStar is following all of the CDC guidelines once we commence sailing. So the Cruise Line International Association, CLIA, also announced there'll be 100% passenger and crew testing policy for any ship carrying over 250 passengers. And on WinStar, because it's more like the feel of a private yacht, and we go to ports and different little villages that there are no crowds. We have 6 yachts, with fewer than 340 guests, so it's not really as much of an issue versus the mega yachts. But there are new proposed safety regulations, including like the touch-free temperature checking, meticulous. Behind the scenes cleaning has always been a big deal on cruise ships, especially on WinStar, but even stepped up a little bit. And again, like I mentioned, the mandatory table service, so there won't be the buffets anymore. And of course, the new high-tech air filtration systems is being implemented in WinStar to circulate fresh air versus recycled air.
And then Chuck, talk a little bit about how Delta has gone through this, and specifically what I'm curious about is things start to shut down in March, and now we're sitting here in January. How did from the immediate shutdown, how did the situation evolve to the point that you're at right now as far as travel volume and the in-flight experience?
Yeah, it's a good question. We went from the highest of the highs to the lowest of lows in 2020. We had paid out the highest profit sharing to our employees by any company in any industry in February. And then the lowest of lows in March, we saw revenues dry up almost 95%. So we were burning through in March about $100 million a day. Today, we announced our fourth quarter performance. We've been able to reduce that to about $12 million a day. We know the first quarter is going to be a little choppy, but by the spring, we're expecting to break even, and then we can build on that momentum. So, and a lot of things have happened. We're 20% smaller than we were 2019. We were one of the few airlines that didn't have to lay anybody off or furlough anyone. We were 20% smaller, but we offered early retirement packages for folks. So a lot has transpired. I also wanted to circle back on that question of hospitality. I think what's different, if anything, because I think everyone's focused on safety, has always been focused on the customer, but it's really helping to educate what you're doing and how you're differentiating what you're doing versus other carriers. And that's the thing I think we learned early on is we were electrostatic spraying every aircraft on every turn, but it didn't rate as high as a bottle of Perel on the ticket counter because people could visualize that. They saw the Perel or the Lysol wipe, but they didn't understand electrostatic disinfecting. And so it was more about educating, and it's more about how we differentiate what we're doing versus what everyone else. Everyone will say that they're cleaning an airplane, but no one was able to guarantee that they were spraying every aircraft on every turn, even blocking the middle seat. We're the only US carrier that continues to block the middle seat, again, to ensure peace of mind, and an extra layer of safety. So when I look back over this past year, we put in over 100 different protocols and processes and innovations to add to added layers of safety, but also just peace of mind. And so to me, it's about educating what you're doing, how you're differentiating, and then trying to react and respond to the customer as to what they need. There's so much information out there. How do you help them cut through the clutter? And I think that's another big piece of this. And that's what we've learned over this past year is how do we communicate individually to customers, to our big corporate partners, and then provide them the tools that they need to get people comfortable with the new travel experience.
And I'm going to come back to the customer mindset in a minute, but I want to give Rob a chance to talk a little bit about, you talked a little bit, Rob, before about what the past year has been like from a revenue standpoint and how you guys have reacted to it. But purely from an investment standpoint, I mean, you're the chief investment officer, you're kind of putting together the strategy for your investments moving forward. How has what you've learned over the past year changed your investment strategy moving forward, and what the future will look like therefore for your company?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think one of the things that we are trying to figure out, and first of all, there's an obvious amount of distress, in the industry, and how that is exactly going to play out in terms of, opportunities, to make investments, do transactions, I think is really yet to be determined. I think it will be a longer, sort of runway of investment activity that I would call sort of distressed. A lot of this stuff really, as bad as it's been between, banking regulations being eased, at least temporarily, different types of accommodations that lenders have been making through the pandemic, you haven't really seen, you haven't really seen a lot of stuff sort of puke out, or just sort of give up, blow up. So the amount of transaction activity that's really occurred over the last year has been very, very tiny. So, if we go back to the 2008 cycle, what I tell people is that, you could have been making interesting investments in 2009, 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014, probably into 2015. And had you turned around and, turned those investments, before 2020, you were probably making very good investments. So that's whatever that is, 5-6 year, runway, in the last cycle, which wasn't nearly as severe and nearly as catastrophic as this particular event. So I think on the investment side, there's a little bit of, everybody's anxious, but there's a little bit of patience that you have to have and just sort of watch this play out, see how things go. I think a lot of things will unravel and create opportunities. One of the challenges for us is playing defense and offense at the same time, where you're trying to, maintain all of your existing investments, do what you need to do there, operate the business, and then, also take advantage of opportunities at the same time. Specifically on investment, focus for us, I think, one of the things that we believe pretty strongly is that the leisure oriented properties, markets are going to come back very quickly and stronger than they were before. So I think you could see leisure destinations, or leisure oriented properties that exceed their 2019, revenues and profits in, maybe not 2021, but 2022. The bigger challenge is, in your more traditional business oriented hotels. So let's say your Monday through Thursday, perimeter, Atlanta office market, where it's business, pure business travel during the week. And then, what we call, kind of Smurfy social business, on the weekends. What are those properties going to look like? How do they recover? Will business travel recover to the same levels that it was in 2019 ever? Or will it take, a very long time? How long will it take? Those types of things. So those are risks and uncertainties. We're trying to focus ourselves on what we believe to be certain right now, which is leisure travel. And we think leisure travel will explode pretty significantly once the vaccinations are widely distributed, and that will come back to normal pretty quickly.
And Chad, with you guys, Rob mentioned that despite the catastrophic magnitude of the drop off that happened from this, in his line of work, there just hasn't been as much opportunity or transaction volume, just because everyone's kind of in a wait and see mode. You guys obviously just went out and acquired Dunkin', so that's a pretty big one. But overall, are you seeing the same thing where there just isn't that much opportunity to sort of buy low on some of these investments? Or are you guys seeing a little bit more? And again, back to the original question, how has your investment strategy changed, if at all, as a result of this?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'd say at a high level, our fundamental investment strategy at work hasn't really changed. Obviously, COVID has kind of presented a new lens for how we think about, the potential risks and opportunities for each investment. But at work, we've always been long-term growth-oriented investors, and that hasn't changed. We focused on investing in consumer-oriented businesses and brands that provide needs-based services. So, people need to eat, they need to exercise, they need to fix their cars. And I think that's why we focus on, essential products and services that frankly people can't live without, or, emotionally connected products and services that they don't want to live without. Because those are businesses that work both in good economies and bad. Rob hit on a couple of things that we're seeing as well. When we went back and looked at the history of our firm, some of the best investments that we made were coming out of the Great Recession, back in 2009 and 2010 and 2011. And while a lot of other firms, private equity firms, sat on the sidelines and waited for the dust to settle, we frankly saw opportunities, and we actually invested more money than we had ever invested in our firm's history. And fast forward to last year, obviously when COVID hit, our first priority was to be good partners to our portfolio companies. It was really tough. No one had an off-the-shelf playbook for how to respond to a global pandemic. But we worked with our management teams to help them navigate the crisis, essentially by playing good defense. And after a couple months, our experience, our pattern recognition, and our instincts told us that it was actually a good opportunity to play offense, to lean in when others were pulling back. So again, similar to a decade ago, and what happened in the Great Recession, we invested, and over the course of the last year, we've actually invested more money than we had ever invested in our firm's history, and I think we're really excited about some of the companies that we were able to add to our portfolio, and we think they'll fit really well within our investment strategy.
So there's some optimism. So we're gonna go with that. And I want to switch over again to our service providers, primarily as far as Amy and Chuck, the businesses you guys are in. And Amy, you started to touch on this, as did Chuck, a little bit earlier about the customer mindset. And I do want to highlight the fact that we've had a couple questions in the chat panel. So I appreciate everyone who has submitted some of those so far. I want to start with Chuck. What are you guys seeing as far as future reservations are concerned? And, are people anticipating that the summer is going to be a safe travel opportunity, that the fall is at 2022? What are you seeing about that? And then talk about the customer mindset as far as safety is concerned, and whether you guys are marketing some of the things like you mentioned Purell, but you're cleaning, CDC recommendations. Talk a little bit about that customer mindset right now, moving forward, and beyond that. Chuck.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. It's a good topic. I think the mindset continues to evolve, and it's fast moving now with the CDC announcement on testing. The vaccine has been good for us. We think a lot more optimism with our discussions with corporations. They've got plans in place to return to work and return to travel. So I think in the spring we're expecting a lot of that to trigger and start to bring some of that volume back. I mentioned the first quarter is going to be a little bit choppy, just like in December. But we're definitely feel the momentum, and people are looking and booking for the summer, which is good. But we do a lot of surveys, and we talk to our corporate customers who represent getting their travelers back to work. And that mindset has continued to change and evolve over the last 10 months. But there's a lot more optimism now than there has been. So we're feeling pretty good about that. And I think when Chad and everybody was talking about investments, I just want to say, even though we're losing money as an industry, it's a great time to invest in your brand. And we're not out buying companies and things like that, but we are putting people before profits. And I think this is a great time for companies to think about how do you protect and build their reputation on the brand? And that's where we've been focused on. And I'll just say our net promoter score is up 20 points than where it was in 2019. So people are recognizing how we're putting them front and center and protecting them and really investing in the overall experience. And so, but I thought it was a great conversation on investment and buying high or selling high and buying low. We view this as a huge opportunity for us to build on the brand, and then it also builds loyalty with your customers, and that's what we're planning on. So blocking the middle seat has a huge expense to us, but putting people first, we think is going to pay dividends, not just today, but in the future.
As someone who's 6'2", I highly endorse you doing that permanently, even if it doesn't make sense economically. Amy, will you talk a little bit about the same thing, the customer mindset, and again, what the future booking schedule looks like, and if you can draw any conclusions on that customer mindset as a result of kind of the timing that people are looking in the future?
Well, if you have a crystal ball, we want to buy it. So I've never resold so much sold business in my 35 years. So that's what we're doing. And we are literally kicking the proverbial can down the road. I've been moving corporate charters further and further out. However, we are counting on that pent up leisure and corporate travel to really explode any day now. And it is happening. But like I said earlier, we thought it would happen faster in 21, and now we're getting our sales both on the retail side and my charters are really strong in 22 and even in 23. So, you know, we're taking this time, like I mentioned before, while our ships are in the, you know, alongside the docks to improve. We're constantly renovating. We get updates every week on the improvements. And like I said, the, you know, putting in the new filtration system. And that's what we're doing to improve our brand. Every week we're, you know, marketing that we're, you know, redoing this dining room, or doing, you know, doing the decks, you know, so we're keeping busy while we're sitting still. And therefore our product is going to be stronger and better than ever when we do finally push off the docks.
I think you hit on a key point there, and Chuck said something along the same lines about using this as an opportunity to build your brand and build the customer loyalty. So with that, I want to segue into our last question, which specifically is, what silver linings have you learned from the experience of COVID and the impact it's had on each of your companies that you maybe wouldn't have otherwise learned, or it would have taken more time for your companies and yourselves as individuals to learn? And how will that help moving forward? Rob, you want to take this one to start with?
I'm laughing. Yeah, I mean, we probably have a unique learning, to be honest with you, out of it. You know, one of the things this has done is, and I know you know, I'm the hotel guy on the panel, and the focus of our business is, you know, hotels, and it's been where I've spent most of my time and all the rest of it. But, you know, we do have, you know, sort of a diversified or somewhat diversified real estate, you know, business. And so one of the things I think for us, at least, the pandemic has done is convinced us to push harder into our other businesses, frankly, that are a little less, have been a little less impacted, or would be a little less impacted by, you know, a huge event like this, or even, frankly, a normal cyclical economic, you know, shock. So we, for example, you know, we've developed a C-store concept that we're rolling out. It's called Neon Marketplace in New England, which you know, we view as a very interesting sort of pretty economic resistant business. You know, if you've spent much time in the Northeast, you still see a lot of mom and pop, you know, gas stations, and, you know, not a lot of what you would see down in the Southeast or southern parts of the country with Quick Trip and RaceTrac. So we're rolling out a concept. We've got a couple of units open, another, I don't know, 7 or 8 that are under development. We spent a lot of time in that area. We spent a lot of time growing we have a lending business in the fix and flip market that's been a residential market. We have probably a $40-50 million portfolio of loans in that business called MCAP Lending. And that business has been really strong. It's the only check I've been getting for the last 12 months. It's been paying dividends. So everything else has been writing checks. So for us, it's actually convinced us to continue to work hard to diversify our business away from such a reliance on hotels purely, which are just naturally a very cyclical business anyway. Obviously, we never saw a cycle, you know, that would be like this. But even regular cycles are not a lot of fun in the hotel business. And so, you know, that's been a silver lining for us. And I think coming out of this, we will be much more diversified. Not that we're going away from hotels, but we will be a much more diversified company, be more prepared for, you know, a future, even normal economic cycle.
Well, when the time comes that Neon Marketplace is ready to come down to the Southeast, I know a guy who's really good at the real estate side of it.
Right. Come on.
Shifting back to Amy. Amy, you talked about, again, brand building and some of the things that you guys have done to your ships. Anything else from a silver lining standpoint that you guys have learned?
We're just quite simply going to take this opportunity to just showcase our amazing, you know, excellent, you know, personal touch and award-winning service. We're just going to take this opportunity during the recovery to just really work on that. So, and take care of our alumni.
And then Chuck, what else with Delta would you say has been a silver lining?
I think there's a couple things. Even when we look at the employees, Delta has always had a very unique and special culture that we've taken pride in. And I think this past year has certainly allowed us to display that to the employees, that we're not only good during good times, but we took care of them in one of our most challenging years. And the measures we put in place was to ensure their safety and all the things that, whether it's shared sacrifice, we didn't have to furlough anyone. We offered aggressive buyout programs for those that wanted to retire. So I think there's a silver lining there, that the employees can see that the Delta culture is truly unique, just as we've focused on the brand for our customer. And then just high level, there's certain construction projects that we've been able to move up and accelerate. Out in LA, we've got a brand new facility there that we're focused on, in LaGuardia. So with the lack of traffic by us and the industry in general, we've been able to speed up some of those projects. And then even on the aircraft side, we've been able to retire some of the older aircraft. So when we emerge out of this, we'll have a more fuel efficient, state-of-the-art fleet that's consistent across. So there is some silver linings to this in a lot of respects.
And Chad, as we take this home, I'm going to throw you a little bit of a curveball here on this last question, because you've talked a little bit about some of the silver linings that you guys have had and some of the investment changes and whatnot during this. But something else that's happened, particularly in the restaurant industry, is the proliferation of third-party vendors, whether it's food delivery or cleaning and sanitation, COVID testing, all these things that are getting food to people in their homes more quickly and more safely. But it's been pretty well chronicled how big of a hit that takes to the bottom line. I mean, it impacts the margin significantly. What are you guys doing to combat that, if anything? Are you developing in-house strategies for your portfolio brands? Can you talk a little bit about that topic?
Yeah, it's a great question. As I think about some of the shifts that are happening in the restaurant industry, frankly, it's themes that we've seen in a lot of other industries historically, and they're just happening to the restaurant industry more recently. So I think technological and digital innovation is going to be increasingly important. As I mentioned earlier, the brands in our portfolio that are gaining the most market share are those that are able to invest in these digital capabilities and leverage data analytics to connect with consumers and provide them with the services and products that they want, when and how they want them. One of the big themes that we're seeing in restaurants is third-party delivery. People, more and more people want the convenience of food being delivered, to their doorstep. It's one of the reasons why one of our theses that we actually had a few years ago was that scale is going to increasingly matter in the restaurant industry. And it's one of the reasons why we have been focused on building larger and multi-branded platforms that can share best practices, but also leverage the scale that they have to make some of the larger investments that you're going to have to make in some of the back office technology to be able to service those delivery orders. As an example, we actually combined our Jimmy John's business into a broader restaurant platform called Inspire Brands that had a few other restaurant businesses within it, like Arby's and Sonic and Buffalo Wild Wings. And one of the unique assets that came with that brand is that they actually they were one of the few restaurant brands that had an in-house delivery network. So we're thinking about, are there opportunities to leverage that network across the other brands in the portfolio to mitigate some of those cost impacts that you're seeing from third-party delivery?
I think the summary of all this is that while this has been really tough over the past year, there's no question, there's no denying that, there's been a lot to come out of it from an innovation standpoint, and that can be used in the future, that there's significant optimism moving forward. So I just want to thank you guys for taking your time to join us today. And to close this thing off, I'm actually going to turn it over to my friend, pledge brother, and co-chair of the Business Casual Series, Ryan Halpern. So Ryan, take us home.
Thanks, Greg. And thank you all for attending this morning's Business Casual panel. Of course, let's thank our panelists and Greg, our moderator, once again for being here. They provided very timely and unique insight into each of their specific industries, which definitely led to a very interesting and great discussion. There will be a recording of the event available in case anyone wants to rewatch or pass along to someone who was unavailable to attend. So just reach out to Ari if you'd like access to that. The next Business Casual Series event is just a few weeks away, and it will be on the evening of February 3rd at 7 p.m. with the CDC's Dr. Amanda Cohn, taking place right here back on Zoom. Dr. Cohn will provide an update on where we stand with the vaccines and what to expect with COVID moving forward. So once again, on behalf of our co-chairs and the Federation, thank you all very much again, and we look forward to seeing you soon.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of the week.
Thanks, Greg.
Thanks, everybody. Great job.